Hillary Clinton's appearance on The View. And I thought it was important to walk through this one because I do think it raises so many of the arguments that are being used to desensitize the public to the ongoing genocide and to provide cover for the American government and its complicity with Israel's actions.
I had more time. I had more time to contemplate the Jake Tapper one. So maybe we can do parts of one and parts of the other.
We do know that innocent civilians in Gaza continue to be killed by Israeli strikes, and the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is growing increasingly dire. Thousands of people around the world are protesting and calling for a ceasefire in Washington, D.C., in Paris, and Berlin. Protesters are crying out about the humanitarian crisis, the loss of life, the suffering of so many innocent civilians. This morning, red handprints could still be seen on the White House fence left from protesters over the weekend, trying to tell President Biden that the U.S. has the blood on its hands of innocent lives. And how can you not be affected by these horrific images we're seeing out of Gaza? Children bloody, children's bodies, families starving, little, if any, medical care, homes destroyed. The Israel Defense Forces insist they're targeting only Hamas, which hides and fire rockets at Israel from among the Palestinian people, from among civilians' homes. But the Secretary General of Amnesty International told CNN that Israel has waged a, quote, campaign of violations of international law. Something must happen, she said, so that we alleviate the suffering of the people of Gaza, unquote.
Israel insists that it's only targeting Hamas. It's not insisting on that. Israel is insisting that it's targeting everybody in Gaza. It's not as if it's saying there'll be no water, no fuel, no food, no electricity just for Hamas. It's targeting, and they're very straightforward about it. They're targeting everybody in Gaza, and they are unabashedly targeting everybody. Defense Minister Gallon, October 9th, just 2 days after, we're imposing a complete siege in the city of Gaza. There will be no electricity, no food, no water, no fuel. Everything is closed. We are fighting human animals, and we are acting accordingly. The person who heads the administration in the occupied territories, he said, Hamas became ISIS. And the citizens of Gaza are celebrating instead of being horrified. Human beasts are dealt with accordingly. Israel has imposed a total block on Gaza. No electricity, no water, just damage. You wanted hell, you will get hell. That's not targeting Hamas. That's targeting the whole population of Gaza straight from the horse's mouth. We don't have to infer it from the carpet bombing of Gaza. They're announcing what they're doing.
Something that has concerned us greatly, something that we have wondered about ever since Hamas brutally attacked so many Israeli civilians on October 7th, is what exactly did Hamas think the Israeli military would do in response to that? Did they not anticipate that Israel would retaliate? Did they not anticipate Israel would retaliate in a way that would cause innocent Palestinians in Gaza to die? Especially given the fact that, as has been established by Israeli intelligence, U.S. intelligence, and journalists who have visited Gaza, the fact that Hamas embeds within the Palestinian population. What did they think would happen?
He says, what did you expect Israel to do? There's another question. What did you expect the people of Gaza to do after being incarcerated in a concentration camp for 20 years? I know what you wanted them to do. You wanted them to just languish and die. But did you not really expect that if they had the opportunity or made the opportunity, that they would attempt to do something? And then there's the logic. If you look at World War II, every time the partisans, the resistance, killed a major Nazi officer, the Nazis retaliated in very bloody ways. The most famous of the killings was when the Czech partisans killed Reinhard Heydrich. What did the Nazis do? They went into the village of Lidice and flattened it and killed every male above the age of 14. So there you have Jake Tapper. When there are reports of the leveling of Lidice and the killing of every man and boy over the age of 14, there comes Jake Tapper from Radio Berlin, and he says, what did you expect the Nazis to do? They killed Reinhard Heydrich. What did you expect them to do? The logic of his argument is the people of Gaza should do nothing, because if they do anything, Israel is going to retaliate. What did you expect them to do? The people of Gaza in 2018, beginning March 30th, 2018, they tried nonviolence. They marched nonviolently to the fence. What did Israel do? It targeted children, targeted medics, targeted journalists, and targeted people with physical disabilities, people on crutches and in wheelchairs. And then it comes along Jake Tapper. Well, they were approaching the fence in Gaza. What did you expect the Israelis to do? That's his logic. The logic is they should do nothing. They should just languish and die, because if they do anything, what do you expect Israel to do?
You made this point so compellingly in your debate conversation with Eli Lake, was it? Where you, when confronted with this kind of line of reasoning, talked about the Warsaw Ghetto. And he was more specifically asking you about, well, didn't they understand the futility of what they were going to do? And that combined with the obvious retribution, wasn't that irresponsible of them to put their own people in the crossfires? And you raised the question of whether anyone would similarly say that people in the Warsaw Ghetto uprising should not have at least tried, even if they were obviously going up against insurmountable odds.
Well, the only thing, as a factual matter, the only thing the uprising in the Warsaw Ghetto achieved, you know, it's the only thing it achieved? It catalyzed the destruction of Warsaw and the deportation of the surviving people in Gaza, surviving people in the Warsaw Ghetto to Majdanek concentration camp. That's all it accomplished. There was never a possibility that the Jewish Fighting Organization was going to defeat the Nazis. The Red Army could barely defeat the Nazis. So we're talking about a handful of people with less than a handful of weapons. But do you ever hear anyone saying, what did you expect the Jewish Fighting Organization, what do you expect the Nazis to do? Yeah, they went in, they leveled Warsaw, and deported everyone to a concentration camp. So there's Jake Tapper saying, well, what did you expect the Nazis to do when the Jewish Fighting Organization went into revolt? Yes, that's exactly what you expect the Nazis to do. Absolutely correct. And it was exactly correct that the Nazis would level the village of Lidice after the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich. But does that make it right?
He also skips over the proportionality argument. I mean, even if I were to accept, which I clearly do not, but even if I were to accept that Israel had a quote unquote right to retaliate as part of its quote unquote right to defense, the idea, what is that number? Jake Tapper, none of these people are willing to answer this question. I asked Vivek Ramaswamy on Rising a couple of weeks ago this question. Tell me what the number is. Okay, 1,400 Israelis killed on October 7th.
Well, now it's been
do you want to double it?
Yeah.
Sure, whatever. Give them the most generous number. But what do you want to do? Double it? Triple it? Quadruple it? I asked this to Vivek Ramaswamy. I said, there's 2.3 million people in Gaza. is Israel allowed to kill every single one of them as part of its right to defend itself? And then everybody acts as though I'm asking an unreasonable question. Like that's an exaggeration. Like it's inappropriate to even contemplate that Israel would kill everybody in Gaza. But what's the line? What's the difference between saying I'm going to kill 10,000 people, half of which are children, in retaliation for Hamas killing 1,400 people, and taking it to its natural consequence? And so when you say, well, didn't you expect retaliation? There's retaliation and there's retaliation. Did anyone actually expect?
I totally agree with that. I mean, that thought has passed through my head. If you're saying retaliation, then the maximum would seem to be an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth.
Right.
But even Omer Bartov in the Times said today, it's already 5 times
Yeah.
the number of Palestinians killed as Israeli killed. But the other side to me is the fact that you would expect them to react that way doesn't mean it was right for them to react
right.
that way.
It's kind of a sad admission. Yeah.
Between acknowledging, that's the Israelis. I know the Israelis. That's exactly how they act. But that doesn't mean that it's right or it's permissible.
Right.
And then the next part is, he says, well, what's Israel to do? Hamas is embedding itself among the Palestinians. Well, the first thing to say is, we've already said it. They're not attacking Hamas. They're very, very clear about that. They're attacking all of Gaza. Right. So whether Hamas is embedding itself among Palestinians or they're not embedding themselves among Palestinians, Israel would be using the same tactic, indiscriminate targeting of the civilian or the total population of Gaza. Hamas is an irrelevancy. They're not attacking Hamas. They're not trying to defeat Hamas. If they do, it'll just be by chance, by an accident. Right now, they're targeting the entire population of Gaza by open admission. Number 2, this claim that Hamas is using the population as human shields. Now, I don't want, which is implicit in the embedding. They're purposely embedding themselves among the civilian population. I don't want to bore your listeners with the technicalities of international law. Human shielding is what's called a term of art. It's not a technical term which has been codified into law. It basically means the conscription of civilians either to protect combatants or to protect a military site. That's basically what is meant by human shielding. If you take the most extensive investigation of human shielding in the case of Hamas, occurs after Operation Cast Lead in 2008-2009, from December 26, 2008 to January 17, 2009. Amnesty International, it does a very exhaustive report on Operation Cast Lead. It was called 22 Days of Death and Destruction. It found no evidence that Hamas was engaged in human shielding. It's just not true. This is a factual question. Now, there's a separate question. It's called taking all feasible precautions when in a civilian area. That is to say, according to the laws of war, what's called International Humanitarian Law, IHL, that if you are firing from a civilian area, you have to take all feasible precautions so as not to endanger civilians. And there, it has occasionally been the case that Hamas has been accused of not taking all feasible precautions. Obviously, if you're living in the most densely populated place in God's earth, it's very hard to take all feasible precautions. So that's one side of the equation. But if you look at all the human rights reports, all of them, going back to Operation Defensive Shield in 2002. Israel always takes Palestinians as human shields. That's just a standard practice. So you have scenes of Israelis, they take over a building, they put the Palestinians in the window, and they fire from behind the Palestinians. They have tank emplacements, and they drag Palestinians to surround the tank emplacements. This isn't my imagination. There is a voluminous human rights, voluminous number of human rights publications which document, yes, there's a lot of human shielding going on there, but it's all going on by Israel. That's all vanished. That's all vanished, airbrushed from the commentary on the Israeli mowings of the lawn in Gaza.
Yeah. Well, let's push down a little further, because Jake Tapper starts to make a little bit of even a more sophisticated and a Machiavellian in an evil way argument about Hamas's responsibility here that I think it's worth
the bomb shelters.
Engaging with. Yeah.
It turns out that a Saudi journalist asked the spokesman for Hamas that very question. His response was quite telling in terms of Hamas's concerns about Palestinian lives.
Dear sister, nations are not easily liberated. The Russians sacrificed 30 million people in World War II in order to liberate it from Hitler's attack. The Vietnamese sacrificed 3.5 million people until they defeated the Americans. Afghanistan sacrificed millions of martyrs to defeat the USSR and then the US. The Algerian people sacrificed 6 million martyrs over 130 years. The Palestinian people are just like any other nation. No nation is liberated without sacrifices.
No nation is liberated without sacrifices. Not exactly an expression of regret for innocent Palestinian deaths.
So Jake Tapper takes that statement and interprets it as Palestinians or Hamas doesn't care about its own people. How would you, what do you make of that framing? Yeah.
I interpret that as a factual account of historical events. He's correct. It took 27 million Russian people, their lives, in order to defeat the Nazis. That's just a fact. Does that mean that Stalin or any of the Soviet leaders was indifferent to the deaths of their people? Does it mean that the Vietnamese leadership was indifferent to the deaths? He gave the figure, Khalid Mashal gave the figure of 3.5 million of Vietnamese were killed. Yeah, that's a ballpark figure, which is, it's a plausible figure, 3.5 million. I think it's a little bit less. The numbers usually given are 1 million Laotians, 500,000 Cambodians, and 2 million Vietnamese were killed by the United States during the Indochina Wars. The fact that he's saying that Hamas can't not resist on the grounds that large numbers of people are going to die is in effect to say the Russians shouldn't have resisted the Nazis. The Vietnamese shouldn't have resisted the Americans. The Algerians
Ukraine shouldn't resist Russia.
Right, exactly, because a lot of people are going to die.
Yeah.
That's just a factual reality. But it doesn't follow from that say Zelensky is indifferent to the deaths of Ukrainians in the course of the war.
Yeah, I thought that was one of the more bad faith arguments that Tapper makes in this, but wait, there's more.
Right.
Let's keep watching.
A journalist from Russia Today, a Russian state media outlet, asked Musa Abu Marzouk from the Hamas political bureau, quote, You have built 500 kilometers of tunnels in Gaza. Why haven't you built bomb shelters where Palestinian civilians can hide during bombardment? And here's how Hamas responded.
We have built the tunnels because we have no other way of protecting ourselves from being targeted and killed. These tunnels are meant to protect us from the airplanes. We are fighting from inside the tunnels. Everybody knows that 75% of the people in the Gaza Strip are refugees. And it is the responsibility of the United Nations to protect them.
If the United States would send $3.8 billion in aid to Hamas for its military, then they would have money left over to build bomb shelters. Now, you might find what I just said facetious, but actually, it's closer to the law, international law, than what Jake Tapper had to say. Because under international law, an occupied people have the right to use force and violence in order to end an illegal occupation. Under international law, an occupying power does not have the right to use force in order to preserve an illegal occupation. So under international law, the $30 billion that Barack Obama gave to Israel over a 10-year period, under the law, the $30 billion should have been given to Hamas because they're resisting an illegal occupation. That's the law. You see, it sounds funny. It almost sounds like I'm trying to score a debater's point. No. Under international law, there is nothing barring a foreign power, nothing in the law barring a foreign power from assisting a people engaged in a war of self-determination. So President Obama, would have been completely in the right legally to allocate $30 billion over a 10-year period to assisting the Palestinians in their struggle for self-determination. However, international law does bar an occupying power from using force to deny a people the right to self-determination. So, if Jake Tapper is so upset by the fact that Hamas is devoting resources to building tunnels, which are used for military purposes that we can agree on, if he's so upset about that, instead of building bomb shelters, there's a very simple solution. Let the United States pay for building the tunnels, which is illegal under international law, and then Hamas will have resources left over to build the bomb shelters. Now, I would like to just get to what's at bottom in arguments like that.
Can I just add one thing before we shift at all?
Yeah.
I do think, one, there's this weird admission that, well, Hamas is underground, so every bomb you're throwing at Gaza that's not affecting the tunnels is purely civilian casualties. You know that. Two, there's all of this discourse about how Hamas is hiding there in this hospital and Hamas is hiding in the school. There was an Israeli official just today, I believe, who said that, Hamas is in the UN and so you're allowed to bomb the UN, who said journalists were complicit with Hamas and so you're allowed to bomb journalists. I mean, Israel isn't even really arguing that they're not targeting, that basically there are no civilians, that they are converting civilians into bombable targets, and that these are not people who are accommodated by Hamas. So if you have this idea that like people in safe zones are open for bombing, like hospitals and refugee camps, then what's to stop Israel from targeting the bomb shelter? Because they're just going to say Hamas was in the bomb shelter. You can't build a bomb shelter because it's going to keep Hamas safe.
Well, that's exactly, okay, I'd like you to just restate the argument. want to just get absolutely clear in my head because I can then use it in the future. So just restate the argument.
So Israel is already saying that zones that are supposed to be safe zones for civilians are not, in fact, civilian zones, that they've been infiltrated by Hamas. That's hospitals, that's UN camps, UN schools, refugee camps, and the like. So why should anybody take their word, take Jake Tapper's word, for the idea that if there were a bomb shelter, it too wouldn't become a target under the justification that Hamas is using the bomb shelter?
The bomb shelter, exactly.
Right.
And
or that bomb shelter shouldn't be built in the first place, assuming that there's a bomb shelter that's impenetrable to bombs, that the bomb shelter shouldn't be built in the first place because it would be used as a refuge for Hamas.
Exactly. Just, I want to just get back to the point, but the point that you just made. So Israel is presenting all of these very sophisticated images to prove that there is a Hamas command and control center under Al-Shifa Hospital. And that every military operation, they target Al-Shifa. There's a very simple way to answer that question. There are 60,000 people in Al-Shifa Hospital. You just send in inspectors. Show us where this command and control center is. You say you have the exact images. You know exactly where they are. Let's see it. Nobody even asks the question. Why aren't they just sending in inspectors to check whether the hospital is being used as a command and control center? Because everybody knows it's nonsense. They say it every single one of their operations. Al-Shifa, the Hamas has the command and control center in Al-Shifa in the basement. In any event, I want to just get back to the logic of this bomb shelter argument. The argument is Gaza is a poor place. About that, nobody's going to argue, okay? So the argument is Hamas is investing all these resources in the tunnels, which it could have used for civilian purposes. It could have built bomb shelters. It could have been a pool. It could have built an amusement park. It could have built a high rise here and a high rise here, but they're using it for tunnels. So what's the logic? The logic is any resources Hamas invests in military resistance becomes a subtraction from resources that could have been invested for the civilians. And given that it's a very poor place, the bottom line is there won't be a resistance because you'll, by virtue of the poverty of the place, have to invest all your resources in the civilian infrastructure and so forth. So what they're really saying is, why is Hamas resisting?
Right. That's such a good point.
So that's what they don't like.
That's such a good point. And it is, I will say, hearing Americans arguing that point, it's pretty rich given the state of our own domestic population.
I was going to say, no, we all complain about a bloated military budget.
Bigger than the next 9 combined, including Russia and China and all of our biggest enemies.
Right. And you say in the face of the fact that there are all these homeless people.
Correct.
Why isn't the money being used for the homeless rather than used for a bloated budget? But it's a very rare person who would say that unless all of the people's needs are met, we shouldn't invest 1 cent in the military. Even the most.
Say it.
But you recognize.
I take your point.
Yes, you recognize that would be considered a very extreme argument.
Right.
But that's exactly what's being said about Hamas. That if there are any civilian needs that go unmet, then it's illegitimate for them to invest money in these tunnels. Well, then that just means you don't want them to resist. You don't think they should have the option to resist. And international law doesn't say that. International law says they have the right to use armed force in a struggle for self-determination. And the other thing is, I don't see it as Jake Tapper's place to make that criticism. If the people of Gaza made that criticism, as in, why are you investing in tunnels and not our bomb shelters? There's an argument there. If they make the criticism, but so far as I know, as critical as the people of Gaza have become of Hamas, because there has been a lot of corruption and repression, no question about that, I'm not aware of any significant, actually, I'm not aware of any insignificant, but any significant opposition to the building of the tunnels, because they're perfectly aware that if they don't do something, this thing is going to go on through eternity.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, let's push on a little bit more, shall we?
The Biden administration would argue that a pause allowing innocent Palestinians to flee and allowing humanitarian supplies to get into Gaza, that's one thing, but that stopping the Israeli campaign against Hamas, which is what a ceasefire would be, stopping it would be another. Here's how former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton put it at an event at the Baker Institute.
People who are calling for a ceasefire now do not understand Hamas. That is not possible. It would be such a gift to Hamas because they would spend whatever time there was a ceasefire in effect rebuilding their armaments, creating stronger positions to be able to fend off an eventual assault by the Israelis.
But, don't take her word for it. Ghazi Hamad, a member of Hamas's political bureau, told Lebanese TV that the Al-Aqsa flood, that's what Hamas called the October 7th attack.
This is just the first time, and there will be a second, a third, a fourth, because we have the determination, the resolve, and the capabilities to fight. Will we have to pay a price? Yes, and we are ready to pay it. We are called a nation of martyrs, and we are proud to sacrifice martyrs.
So, Hamas, which is the government of Gaza, based on their own words, A, they think the loss of Palestinian civilian lives is just the cost of liberation. B, they think that even though they're the government of Gaza, it's not their responsibility to protect Palestinian civilians. The tunnels are for themselves, for fighting, not for civilians. And C, they're determined to continue attacking Israel the same way they did on October 7th, over and over and over, based on what they say. So for these reasons, Israel says, we can't have a ceasefire. Listen to what they say. So they're pushing forward with their ground incursion into Gaza.
First of all, I think there's a common expression, a commonplace expression, wherever there is oppression, there is resistance. Not a particularly original idea. So when Marzouk says there's going to be another and another and another action like this, well, there was another and another and another slave revolt. Not altogether shocking revelation that people who are oppressed will continue to resist. But then he takes offense at Marzouk saying that we're a nation of martyrs. Okay, and that's supposed to conjure up this image of fanatical jihadis,
suicide bombers,
and the rest. So, allow me just to read a passage. Okay? The British Empire and the French Republic, linked together in their cause and in their need, will defend to the death their native soil, aiding each other like good comrades to the utmost of their strength. Even though large tracts of Europe and many old and famous states have fallen or may fall into the grip of the Gestapo and all the odious apparatus of Nazi rule, we shall not flag or fail. We shall go on until the end. This island, or a large part of it, even if it were subjugated and starving, even then we would continue. But when Winston Churchill says that, that's heroic. It's in all the history books. We shall go on till the end, even if we're subjugated or starving. But when Marzouk says, we are willing to sacrifice, we are a nation of martyrs, we will do what it takes to free ourselves, to emancipate ourselves, to break out of this concentration camp, it suddenly becomes sinister, fanatical, jihadi talk. Our American history, what's one of the most famous lines from the American Revolution? Give me liberty or give me death. Isn't that a martyr? Isn't that a martyr? And that's supposed to be exemplary of the standard to which we should all rise. Give me liberty or give me death. How is that different than what Marzouk said?
Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.